to the time when darkness is overcome by light, when evil is cast out from before you, as we lift up our hands just to praise you, as we stand face to face with Yeshua, Messiah, we'll scream and we'll shout out, Hallelujah. At the New Jerusalem, when the war is done, when the world is new, and the tribes are one, the New Jerusalem, that's where we'll be, just worshiping the King of Kings, the God of all, the God of all. Come and deliver us, come and deliver us, come and deliver us, your people, come and deliver us, come and deliver us, come and deliver us, your people.
Filled with the Spirit. Amen. Amen. So let's dismiss the quiver first. Are you ready? Okay. So today it's going to be Brandon and Melody and Abby.
Hey guys, quiver, when you all get in there, let's go ahead and make sure everything's cleared up. I'll be in there just a minute. Abby is going to go ahead and take roll and do a review, so please give her your undivided attention, and captains, please help with that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, as soon as they move out of the way, then okay. So now, Miss Nayla, are you ready to take your group on over? Okay. All right. And Brandon, if any of the captains need to kind of help Nayla get things situated before y'all get started, we might even need to close that door between the two rooms, please. All right. I'm telling you, when the young people leave, this room gets empty. Okay. All right. Just since we prayed earlier, Robert and Nate Taylor was telling me that there is a brother. He's not part of our fellowship, but is a brother in another fellowship that was taken to the ER. Is that right, Dawn? Okay. He was taken to the ER. I guess there's some chest pains or something like that, and they're wanting to check him out. So tell me his first name. David? Okay. All right. So I thought it would be appropriate for us to just take a moment here and let's pray for David. And is there anyone else that there is a pressing need that we need to pray for while we're doing that? Okay. By the way, you're doing better, right? Good. All right. All right. All right. Well, let's do this real quick. I don't know this brother, but there's people that love him and care about him, and we just want to pray that the Father will go into that room and touch his life right now. Can we do that? Our Father, we come to you on behalf of David, this brother. Some of us know him, some of us do not, but you know him very well, and you know the issue that he is facing. You know the root cause, and we just pray, Father, that you will guide those that are attending to him to give them insight into what to do and how to care for him. And in the meantime, we pray that you will bring peace to his family, to him, to those who care about him, those who surround him, and that you will just touch his body right now, and that you will raise him up from this situation and restore him to health. And for those, Father, that are looking after him and checking in on him, we just pray, Father, that you will embolden them to pray the prayer of faith right there with him. And we just all petition you on his behalf right now, that you will go into that room and that you'll have your way. And these things we pray and ask in Yeshua's name. Amen. All righty. So I guess we are back live online, right? We're good to go. So welcome back, everybody that is joining us on the live stream. And before we go any further, there is a desperate need taking shape even as I speak. Can you guess what it is? I need coffee. Brandon and Melody found this sign for me. It's in the office. Oh, you're going to bring it? Okay, well, she'll bring it with the coffee then. I'll wait till then. But it was like, they must have thought of me when they made that sign. Anyway. All right, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to let you help me in today. Is that all right? All right, I'm going to hand you this microphone right here, and you're going to kind of help me see who has comments or questions. And if it gets out of line, if it gets out of order, it's your fault. Okay? No, just whoever raises their hand that you see, go to them next, and we'll do it that way.
So what you'll do is...
Okay. So, is anyone want to begin today and kind of get things started off for us today? Louise, it's your birthday. Do you have anything that you'd like to share? Okay. Well, since you're the birthday girl, we're going to let you go first. Hey, look at this is my sign. Can you see it? First I drink the coffee, then I teach the things. So I thought, wow, Selah, All right, so Louise, the birthday girl, has something she would like to share. So, I said that kind of kidding, but it kind of worked out, didn't it?
Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but I will, since you offered.
All right.
It's in response to what you said, that Yahweh, God, will bring things into our life from places we don't always understand to kind of help push us along or encourage us to do something or stretch us or squeeze us or whatever we need. Mm-hmm. Back in I have to think through this. Back in the middle 70s, I'm going to give away my age now, but I'm not going to tell you all.
Okay, 70s is not your age. You mean the 1970s is what you're talking
1970s.
about. I'm picking.
I was in Bible college for about 2 years. And I met a young lady there. She was about 4 years younger. She was like 18, a punky 18-year-old. And she became a part of our group in the Bible college that I was going to, and we used to go down to a hospital in Miami and minister to those that were handicapped, paralyzed, physically challenged. And Sheila, this punky little 18-year-old, went with us. And she was so touched by the ministry and so touched by the group that we were a part of, it turned her life upside down, and she started serving God for years. Well, my life and her life kind of went in different directions. And about 3 years ago, because of Facebook, she somehow connected with me. Now, I'd had many years after Bible college that I wasn't serving Yahweh as I should. When I met Nick, we both were part of a church down in South Florida, and we both were serving the Lord at that time. So there was a big turnaround. Well, when I met Sheila again on Facebook a couple years ago, she was still in love with God and serving him with the homeless ministry. And I was like, oh my gosh. And she said to me several times over the last couple years, it's all because of you and what you did into my life as an 18-year-old that I am where I am today. Well, Yahweh took and turned that whole thing around, because then I began to watch her ministry on Facebook and what she was doing. And Yahweh turned it around and used her life to spur me on to want to reach out into some ministry of some sort, just to give. And it was like he used her back in my life. Because she sent me a note, I love you so much. You have been my hero. And I sent her back a message and I said, and you have been my inspiration.
That's a great testimony. Thank you for sharing that. It kind of amplifies something I think we can all relate to. You never know who's listening. You never know who's watching. And you never know what you may be doing or saying that maybe you don't think too much about it, but it might make the difference between life and death for somebody else. And so that's an incredible testimony. You wanted to add something to that?
Yeah, the other part of it, is like... The other part of it is she's interested in what I'm doing now, in being Torah observant, walking on Hebrew roots, on Sabbath and everything. And I have not really reached out and taught her or sent her stuff, and I just keep thinking, I know, Yahweh, you're telling me I need to reach out to Sheila, because she's got a hunger, and she's had a hunger since she was 18 years old, and it's just amazing. And she keeps saying, I want to get together with you on the phone, I want to talk, I have so many questions. So it's like he's using both of us in each other's life to bring her around, because she's still very, very Christianized, wants to, reach out on the holidays, but she reaches out and ministers to people, and that ministers to me. Well,
and you said that inspired you. People who are doing things like that, it is inspirational, It reminds us that, what we're part of is not something for us to sit around in an isolated situation hoarding all this to ourselves, but actually he's given us this to do something, to use it, for his purposes and to benefit his agenda. You love me, you love me. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, I appreciate it. If I may, I just kind of, in that vein, I'm just going to take this opportunity to say this. I have had a prayer for many, 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 many years, kind of a silent prayer. But when I was in high school, going into the 10th grade, my disposition was, I walked through life literally like this. Not looking people in the eye, I would look at the ground, and I would walk around like that. And if a girl spoke to me, I have literally ran, if a girl spoke to me. I lived life that way. And I was very an introvert. And from the summer of coming out of the 9th grade, going into the 10th grade, I signed up for a study hall, which was basically sit in class and don't do anything, take naps and such. And I signed up for a study hall, and so over the summer, the principal of the school called me, and he says, I see you signed up for a study hall. That ain't going to happen. So he said, here are your choices, chemistry or speech. I loathe, abhor formulas and all that science. History, okay, I'm good, but science, no. So I'm like, but speech, you mean to get up in front of somebody and talk and say something? So I'm like, well, do I want a cyanide capsule or a bullet to the head, So I thought, well, the chemistry thing, I can't fake that, but the speech thing, I can just kind of melt into the back of the room, and get around that. Well, the first day in class, the teacher, I'll never forget her as long as I live. Her name was Mary Hayes. And there's a reason I'm sharing this, and I'll get to the point in a moment. But her name was Mary Hayes, She had a short Dorothy Hamill haircut. She smoked like a chimney. She swore like a sailor. She almost every day, she wore some kind of camel-colored corduroy pants that she wore tucked into calf-length boots that she pooched out like here to make them look like they were riding breeches. And she walked around in class with a riding crop under her like this. On this hand, she had a deformity. She had nubs. And so out of the nubs, these little hairs were going out of them. So she was quite the sight. So the first day of class, she gets up in front of the class, and I'm in the back of the room, kind of like this. And she says, "You, what's your name?" I told her my name. "Come here." And she sat me on a stool, and she says, "Now, look at the class." And she says, "I want you to convince them that you're a rock." And I'm like, "You're crazy." But the point of this is that she drew me out. She made me do things that I thought I would never, ever have to do. And then, she made me give these speeches, not just me, but as part of the class. She'd make me get up in front of people and talk, and she would say, "Look them in the eye," that kind of a thing. She was not gentle. She was not soft-spoken. She would walk around class sometimes. If she gave you some kind of written work, you had to write something out, a speech or whatever. She'd be walking around with that riding crop under her arm, and those boots would be clicking. And I'm like, I'm in Germany, Every once in a while, she'd come around and she would lean on you. She'd put them nubs on your shoulder, and the hairs would scratch up against your neck. And you're like, But I'm telling you all of that to tell you this. I love that woman. She changed my life. I didn't realize it then, but the Father used her to change my life. In a way, she is at least partly responsible for why I'm here. Because he used that person, that woman, to awaken something that had to be awakened. Would I have chosen her to be the one to alter my life in that way? No, absolutely not. But I love that woman. I haven't seen her in close to, it's going on 40 years. But my prayer is that one day I'll get to look her in the eye and say thank you. So you never know who's watching. You never know that little statement that you make or that little deed that you perform, how it may dramatically change the trajectory in somebody's life. And so that's something that we need to be cognizant of. And maybe one day the Father will let that prayer be answered. And I hope that one day, that I will be able to tell her, I want to thank you for everything that you've done for me. So anyway, who's next? Who's got the microphone? Oh, yes. See, that's your job. Well, yes.
You lose points.
Yes, Marlene.
I'm glad I was next because a lot of times I wanted to say something off of what you just said. It was good because those people, but one of the things that I saw when you were talking is that here's this harsh person. And a long time ago I heard something at a Sukkot. It said, keep your friends closer, keep your enemies even closer. Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. Because a lot of us, we try to, and this has to go with even what you were talking about, during your message today. A lot of times we always gravitate towards, I call them the yes men, everybody that agrees with you, oh, I agree, and I'm telling you, and it's good. I mean, you need that, confirmation in that. But I'm telling you how much I learned from people that disagree with me. how much, more. Yeah, my daughter and I are saying, yeah, me and you. and me and my husband, wow, that's maybe okay, I got you. I'm getting a picture here now, Yeah, but, because I think that it's awesome that, when you're around the people who are harsh with you. And I was just telling some friends in line that I have a friend, and she's in this room right now, and I went through a really hard time in my life, and she heard me whine and complain for 2 weeks, and then she said one day, "Suck it up, Buttercup."
Amen. Thank you.
We weren't looking at you, Crystal Ann, or anything like that.
And I'm telling you, we hysterically laughed, and that spirit of oppression and depression and everything just broke. And, sometimes you need somebody to just come at you and just say, you know what, suck it up, Buttercup, give you, and go forward. Because otherwise, if you're always around those who will sympathize with you, and, and that's a good thing. You know what I'm saying? You need a balance,
I understand what you're saying.
But we need those people, and we need to appreciate, and we need to see, like you said, you'll see these people, and you're trying to point the finger of blame and saying, oh, they did this, they did that. But really what God did is, it goes back to your message last week that said the crisis reveals. Because that very situation you're in actually is bringing out that dross in you, that if you pray it off you, and you have like somebody around you that can pray that thing off of you, it's just like the gold, the dross comes up and you have to scoop it out, otherwise it'll go back in and it'll even be harder in you. Yeah. If you have those people in your life, they're a blessing to you. They are a blessing. So I just wanted to ride off of what you said.
You wanted to write it off or ride off? Okay. It's like, you're going to make your point here, aren't you, Marlene? No, I'm just playing. No, it's true. I mean, from the beginning, the Father brings opposites into our lives. The woman was an opposite to the man, not to undercut, not to undermine, but to be that opposite, to make us into what we're supposed to be. And so he does that all the time. I mean, she and I have been together 6 years. 36. 36. But, we'll go to our end not agreeing on a lot of things. That's just the way it is. But she, as I shared this morning, she has spoken to, sometimes in very harsh terms, the pessimist that I am, that is my tendency, and what that's done is it's challenged me to be more of an optimist, to at least balance it out with, the other shoe doesn't necessarily have to drop. And, I have my days. I've had my days like that this week, but where we also, like you said, need those people that will encourage and not sympathize, but will understand, that because we've all been there, right? And that's what this congregation has done for me. It's helped me in those times to know that there are people who will encourage and who will listen and who will understand, to help us get through those kinds of things. And I hope that everyone, to some degree, is getting that. That's kind of why we're here. That's why we have this. That's what we're here for. We're not here to fix everybody's situation. We're here to help everybody work through as they're fixing their situations. So anyway, yes, Robert.
First off, you're not a pessimist. I tried to compliment somebody on my staff, and he asked if he could back his own desk out or if he needed to come back later that week. So, yeah, you're far from being a pessimist.
Between you and Bob, y'all are cracking me up today.
But no, my question is from in Exodus 18:5. You read the passage where Jethro went to Moses and took with him his wives and his sons. Why not his daughters?
Why not Moses' daughters?
No, Jethro took his wives and his daughter, or his wives and his sons, but it doesn't say he took his daughters.
Well, I read that to say that Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with Moses' sons and his wife. Because it says that, let me find it here. He came with his sons and his wife unto Moses in the wilderness. Backing up, that's where I need to do. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, and after he had also sent her back, and her 2 sons, one of which was Gershom and the other one was Eleazar. So I read that as Jethro is bringing Moses, Zipporah, Moses' wife, and his 2 sons. So I think that's what it was saying.
I just wanted to check on how I was reading that. So,
Okay.
And my second one, which is actually not really a joke, but I'm interested in language. So when you went through the word kavash,
The furnace.
yeah, is that where we got our phrase, put a kibosh on it?
Put a kibosh on it. I'm going to go to the tablet, Jonathan. All right, so this is what he's referring to, that root word, and that's where we get the idea of the furnace. It's something that it burns up, it eliminates. So, pardon me? Kavash. I'm sorry, you're right. I wrote it in Hebrew correctly. I misspelled it in English. Okay. All right, let me redo that. So, yeah, you say it kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I'll tell you what, I believe that there's a lot of things that we say that are derived from Hebrew. Like what? Duh. Well, do you remember the Seinfeld? Yada, 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 yada. Okay, you know what yada means? To know. So they're like you saying, you know. So yada, 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 yada. Yeah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So the word cap. C-A-P. How close does that sound to kippah? So I think Hebrew's the mother tongue. I think everything kind of stems off of Hebrew. And so it's been, stuff has been added to it. Stuff's been taken away from it. I get that. But if you could trace it back to the original, the one river coming out of Eden before it parts and becomes 4 heads, if you could trace it all back, everything probably English, Spanish, every other language on the face of the earth, because it goes back to one language in Genesis chapter 11. And I believe it's Hebrew. So all of that to say, you may be right. There may be something to that. So the next time we put a kibosh on it, we'll just say, put a kavash on it, right? All right. Aaron?
I once heard that shamrock, I heard this from someone else, I don't know, that shamrock existed in Gaelic and in Hebrew, I think, or something like that, and it kind of meant the same thing, but they developed it, like, it was astounding. Anyway, I have no idea if that's true or not, though, but I thought maybe you'd throw that out there if you knew anything about shamrock. No, okay. All right. Remind me of that. So what I wanted to I wanted to mention first that I really appreciated that you said look at the purpose and not the person, and it kind of reminded me of when Balaam was seeing all the camp before him, and they didn't know he was up there, but he was looking at them, and he was the one who proclaimed how beautiful are your tents, and he saw no sin. He saw them as being righteous. When if you look within the camp, they were not being righteous at all. There was a lot of stuff going on in the camp, and yet, from a spiritual eye, they were looked upon as being righteous, and it's because he was maybe seeing their purpose, and Balaam was just able to see into God's purpose for them and how beautiful they were. I don't know. I thought that was a connection I drew while you were speaking.
I see the connection. I'm with you. I'm tracking with you.
All right.
But because you're, it's really easy to look at the individual, and pick it apart, But when we start looking at the purpose, we see God's purpose in it. It's the diamond in the rough. Isn't that from a movie? Because I just saw that with the kids, Lisa. The diamond in the rough. Anyway, Yes, I'm sorry, continue.
Okay, so well, I just wanted to bring that up because I don't know if you were tracking with me on that or not.
I
But,
am tracking with you.
Okay, so the
I
real
agree
question,
with you.
Okay. But the real question I had, I just want to get some correction or instruction on this. So I always thought of Jethro as being a priest from Midian, almost like a Samaritan would be viewed by the Jews, in that he was he acknowledged and knew Yahweh, but he maybe had some other gods that he was still a priest of Yahweh. He was Yahwist anyway. And he was basically part of sort of almost like a dispersion of what was originally a part of Jacob, and eventually, I may be completely off, but basically not. Yes, everyone kind of was brought into Egypt, but then there might be some people who leave Egypt and go into Saudi Arabia, and that was kind of. I thought that Jethro was maybe something more like a Samaritan would be considered. So that was my first question around Jethro, and I'll stop there.
I don't know other than what we see in the scripture and some other things that I've read.
Okay.
It said that he was a priest of Midian. Okay, what does that mean? There are commentaries that are a lot closer to when this happened than what we are right now. That say that was involved other gods and other philosophies and things like that. That it was a mixed mentality. Now, whether or not he considered Yahweh to be part of that mix, it's possible, I guess, considering he lived basically in the backyard of this this mountain. So I mean that's possible. I don't know for certain, but I guess it's possible. So either way you look at it, here's what happens, though. When he sees what has happened on behalf of Israel, he abandons all of that, and he acknowledges that the God of Israel is the God. He is God. He's above all, and he's not these other gods. So I think that's the primary point. That would be the focus and emphasis.
Well, and then the follow-up to that is the fact that he was brought in so much, like that Moses trusted him so much, even though he was called. I mean, and of course Moses was growing too, but he was brought into the camp. I almost got the impression as you were talking that it was okay. So I remember that there's a name change or he was referred to as two different names. Jethro.
There's another name too.
And so you had said that there's you added a vav to it, to Jethro's name, Yithro, to make it Yithro, or the vav was added sometime between when Moses left him in Egypt and when he was brought together during the Exodus. Is that correct?
Let me find the verse for you so you can check this out. Let's see. It's in chapter 3, I think it is.
Exodus?
Yeah, Exodus.
Chapter.
I need to find the verse for you here. It's in chapter 3 or it's in chapter 4, and right now I don't have my notes right in front of me, but there is one of those places that it's translated for us as Jethro, okay?
Oh.
But when they spell it in Hebrew, it's Yud Tav Resh,
Okay.
like Jether. It would probably how it'd be transliterated. Well, there's that as well, but I'm talking about a different occurrence of the name. What's the chapter and verse?
We read it earlier. I don't remember.
Okay.
I went back and followed you, and it says Ether.
It's in chapter 4. It's in chapter 3, and my mind is just escaping me right now. I can't recall the verse, but yeah, it would be translated probably as Yether or Jether or whatever, but it's spelled Yud Tav Resh.
But then a vav
And afterward, 4:18. All right, let me find it real quick. Exodus chapter 4. Yeah. Okay. So chapter 4, verse 18. And Moses went and returned to Jethro, his father. Okay. But in Hebrew, it is spelled here, Yud Tav Resh. Okay. So when we get over into chapter 18, it's spelled Yud Tav Resh Vav.
Okay.
Okay. So that's the difference. And so what I was saying is that Vav, that the distinction there, what that suggests is that hook, joining things together. So I was just trying to make the point that even in his name, or the rendering of his name, it is speaking to the action that he takes, and that he's bringing Moses' wife, he's reuniting the family, but he's also joining himself to the people of Israel.
So that's God changing his name?
Yeah, and that was so. That's the final question. That's actually what I'm leading up to. Is that God did the same with Abram and Sarai, and a couple others. Israel obviously is a lot bigger of a change than Jacob, but and then you had been teaching on something else that was something about in Hosea 2, change the name. And I just wonder, it started, maybe pieces were coming together, or maybe I need to be corrected and say, well, you're reading too much into it, that these people, Jethro, Abraham, Sarah, were, as soon as they knew God, then that's when God gave them their new name and their purpose at that point. And maybe it was before, so maybe Jethro with the Vav at the end actually knew God prior to what we're looking at on 18. Somehow he made that sort of conversion between the 2 points, and then he comes to them, godly during the latter part of the Exodus story, having known God and gotten that Vav because God gave him that extra purpose, something like that.
Well, we know that the Father has changed people's names, and it was to speak purpose into their life. You mentioned Abraham and Sarah. They were Avram and Sarai. And that the addition to those names, and I think most of everybody knows this here, but let me just for the sake of everyone. Okay, so that's Avraham. Aleph, Bet, Resh, He, Mem. Okay. The difference between Avraham and what he was known as previously, that's Avram. The difference is this letter right here. And the same letter is what makes the difference between Sarai and Sarah. And so that's the letter He. And He is emblematic of breath. And so the idea is he's breathing into Avram, he becomes Abraham. He breathes into Sarai, she becomes Sarah. And it harkens back to when he formed man from the dust of the earth, and he breathed the breath of life into his nostrils, and he became a living nefesh, a living soul. Now, here it's He, with Jethro it's a Vav. Okay. I don't know how the distinction came about. We're not told, I do know this, that Moses recorded these things in the Torah. Most of them, he goes into the tent of meeting and God speaks to him face to face as a man speaks to a friend. And he would say on multiple occasions, speak unto the children of Israel and say. And Moses is taking dictation down. So we could speculate. I'll use that word. We could speculate that there is a reason, there was a purpose that the Creator had in when Moses wrote his name down in Exodus chapter 4, that it was to be missing the Vav, whereas we can make the distinction in Exodus 18 where it has the Vav. I don't know that for certain. We'll have to leave it in the realm of speculation. But I do believe this, that there is reason for every word, every phrase, rabbinically, even the spaces between the letters. There's things that are there that you go grammatically, why is that there? And then we delve into it, we find out, wow, there's a message to be gleaned from this. So, again, if the Father named him that to make that point, I don't know. Does that mean the point still isn't made? Moses wrote it down for a reason. So, anyway, so that's the best I can do with that one. Sorry.
Okay, I have a question and a statement.
Okay.
My question is the question my kids keep asking me that I had the same question when I was a kid. How come Moses couldn't keep his wife with him?
Speculating. that whole circumcision thing didn't go so well with her. I mean, it didn't go over well with her. We're not, that I can recall, we're not told. Here it suggests that Moses sent her back or sent her away. Stay with your parents, stay with your dad. I could only assume that because of the mission that he had to, what is about to happen, perhaps he felt like it would be better if she's there and out of the way, out of harm's way, maybe even, and kind of keep her there. It might be, I need to do this unfettered, I don't know. There isn't anything that I can detect that is written in the scripture that says this is why, I can tell you that there are some commentaries that suggest, I probably shouldn't tell you that it was just a situation of, woman, you stay here,
She said he was going to war.
Well, it is true. He is kind of going to war. So if we're going to go down that route, then there's more ammunition in the idea of keeping her in a place that she would be safe. Not that she would have been in danger had she been with her husband, but I mean, he's going into a situation he's not really sure what to expect either. So I don't know. Well, we're left to speculate. I really don't have a definitive answer on that.
I wasn't sure if it was the whole, like in Leviticus it says, that a priest isn't to be with his wife, in marital matrimony, because he had to be clean and holy. So I wasn't sure if it was like a defilement thing because he was with God so much that God, like the whole.
Well, that's kind of what I was alluding to when I said he needs to go into this unfettered.
Unfettered, okay.
I mean, I'm fixing to open up a can. Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm going to open up a can and walk through a minefield all at the same time. It is very, very difficult to balance ministry with marriage. It's extremely difficult. On one hand, first and foremost, our relationship with the Father is the most important thing, right? But then we have this other relationship where we're married to somebody. We're to be one with them. And where the husband is concerned, he's supposed to be the head of the house, and he's supposed to love her as the Messiah loved his congregation, being willing to lay down his life. And at the same time, you have to do that and figure out how you lay down your life for the Creator and those things that he's called you to do. So, I mean, it's tough being married, right? And staying married. It's hard. It's hard. All those people say, oh, it's the greatest. You're lying. It's hard. But anything worth having that has eternal value is going to be the most difficult things we've ever done, right? I'm just saying that it is very difficult to balance ministry with marriage, to do what you're supposed to do ministry-wise and still continue to do what you do marriage-wise. I can only imagine how difficult it must have seemed to someone who is going to go into that situation and still, how do I, well, honey, how did your day go? Well, I went to Pharaoh and told him to let the people go. Things didn't go the way I'd planned. I've had a hard day at work. Well, the kids need a bath. How do you do that? You know what I'm saying? So, I'm just thinking in practical terms. Just, it would be very, very difficult to do that. So maybe that was the Creator's way of having mercy on both of them, him and her. Because it's
indication that she was a believer. I know her.
Now, hold on. Here's the rules.
Okay.
If you're going to speak, you have to speak in the microphone. So, because everybody wants to know what you've got to say. I'm not trying to shut you down, but seriously, people are going to be commenting. What did he say? What did he say? All right. He was just making the comment. There's no record that she was a believer. Well, That seems logical because that's Jethro's daughter, and he was a priest of Midian, and which goes back to what we were talking about a while ago. So there's that to add to the situation. Again, don't know for sure, but it could be any of these things. I just feel like that maybe it was just what he had to do, what the Father was sending him to do, was going to be a lot easier for him to focus on those things if he's not having to focus on all these other things at the same time. And I might be totally, out of left field with that. It may be something completely different, but that's the best I can come up with.
So
And what was your?
were they divorced then? When he sent her back?
I don't see anything that they were divorced.
No.
No.
Okay. The other thing that I was reading Halissa Elwine's book about biblical, the calendar and stuff, and she was talking about Shabbat, and one of the things that she was talking about in there was I guess you smell spices at the end of Shabbat before at sunset or something.
Havdalah is what it's called.
Okay, you got a name for it. That's great. I went to this meeting. I don't know if I'm allowed to say what kind of meeting it is, but it's just an oil meeting. And they were saying that when you smell oils or you put oils on you, it changes your frequencies. And it just floored me, that God was having you smell like clove, which it cleans your body and keeps you healthy, and cinnamon and all these things that, I was telling my children because it just floored me. Like I was telling Mrs. Taylor this too, but it just floored me because when people say, Jenna, you're being religious, what is it? Ritualistic? Yeah, legalistic. I told my kids, if I tell you to wash your hands every time you go to the bathroom, you may say, my mom is so religious. She makes me wash my hands every time, but it's because they don't know what I know, and we don't know what God knows. And I just thought that was incredible that God knew all about oils before their oils were even an oil.
Well, I mean, there's a reason he tells us things, and, I'm not the oil person to the degree that I have a T-shirt, that's got a bloody mark where, this guy shot me and my wife said, I have an oil for that. You ever seen that? No, it's legit. Guy come out with a T-shirt that says somebody shot me, but my wife has an oil for that. I'm not that far into it, but there's a reason that he made these things, Many years ago, I was informed that, and maybe this is something I need to go back and validate, but I was informed that the reason the Creator told Israel to circumcise the males on the 8th day, because in that newborn male has more vitamin K in his system on the 8th day of his life than he will ever have for the rest of his life. So if that's true, I mean, that there's a reason he tells us these things. He's not just commanding us and instructing us to do these things willy-nilly. There's a reason. There's a reason he told them when they were in the wilderness, take a paddle with you and go outside the camp. There was a reason. There was a logical reason for that, because the bubonic plague swept through Europe because they didn't take any care to make sure that things were taken care of as they should, and lots of people died. And by the way, the Jews got blamed for that. Why? Because they actually did what God told them to do. There was a logical reason for these things. So I know we've strayed way off the oil thing, but the point is there is a reason. And it's not just religion that he tells us do this, don't do that. There is a purpose. Everything is about supporting life, enhancing life, life thriving, producing fruit. So thank you for the statement. Who's next? Yes, sir.
Okay. On a different note altogether, chapter 18 does something different from anything that I've really seen or remember. Anytime just about that Jethro's name is mentioned, it's followed by Moses' father-in-law, almost like we forgot from the time before and the time before. Is there a reason why it repeats it probably a dozen times throughout the chapter, giving an explanation of who Jethro is?
There probably is a reason. I don't know. What jumped out at me is that it started out the chapter telling us that he was a priest of Midian, more so than the other. And so I'm kind of meditating on that. Why does it tell us that compared to how many times it tells us that it's Moses' father-in-law? Apples and oranges, there are times in the Bible when talking about Esau that right in the middle of the sentence, he'll stop and say, and Esau is Edom. Okay? He'll just be talking about what was happening, and then he'll stop, Esau is Edom. So obviously there is a reason that he told Moses to write these things down this way. I haven't discovered all the answers yet, though. But I'm sorry, that was not the answer you were looking for. Do what? You don't have to hear these people later. You don't.
That's your job. I didn't know the answer either. I just thought you might have. I thought about that every year that I read that chapter. Why do they keep repeating the same thing? I believe there's a reason for stuff like that, but I just don't get it.
Just because I don't get it doesn't mean there isn't a reason, though. It's not on the problem's not on that end; it's on this end. But there's a reason that I have to tell my kids over and over and over. We have that conversation. How many times am I going to have to tell you this? Right? Because apparently there are things that we need to be told over and over again. Now that Jethro was Moses' father-in-law is. What's so important about that? I don't know. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that he mentioned that he was a priest of Midian. Think about it this way. Here's the man who, through him, God gave the world the Torah. In Judaism, it's Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher. His father-in-law was a pagan priest.
So he's distancing himself.
I don't see it so much as him distancing himself as much as it is making the point that the guy who the Creator chose to give the world the Torah through, his father-in-law was a pagan priest. To make this point that the people that God uses have these close connections to people that you would never consider that God would use.
Could it be that
Joseph,
Sorry.
I'm sorry, hang on just a moment. Joseph, his father-in-law, was the high priest of Heliopolis. He was the guy in charge of pagan worship in Egypt. Joseph. So you have these kinds of situations in Scripture. I don't want to go beyond what the Scripture says, but I have to consider the possibility he's trying to get us to see that, see who I chose here, and look how closely he was connected to those people right there. And by the way, Moses didn't disdain his father-in-law. He actually listened to his father-in-law, took his advice, applied it. What did you want to say, brother?
Well, that's what I was just going to ask. Because right down the road, it seemed important that he had some sort of credentials with Moses in the sense that he suggested how for Moses to set up basically his government system. So, there had to have been more than just, this is just some guy that I know.
Right. That could be something to it. I'm going to read this one here, and you find who's next here in the room, please. Please comment on the power of God's voice to the Israelite people. I'm assuming that is in relation to him speaking audibly in Exodus, where the people heard and then they asked that he would not speak. If that's not what you're asking, you need to follow it up and let me know. I guess I always just come away from that with how terrifying it must have been to them to hear the Creator of all things speak in an audible voice. I felt like I have heard God speak to me many, 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 many times, but never in an audible voice. Always, that impression, that still small voice. And I've spoken to people who said they've heard God speak to them audibly. But I don't know. But I've also met people who said they speak to angels all the time. And they have these conversations with angels all the time, like it just happens, And I'm thinking, every time I've seen somebody have an encounter with an angel, it freaks them out and they fall down on their face scared to death. More so, and this is my point, how much more so would it be if God spoke to us in an audible voice? Okay? The people were in fear. And so I think that part of that demonstration at Mount Sinai in speaking to them in that way was to instill a godly fear. Because we're talking about people who heretofore had feared Pharaoh. So let it be written, so let it be done. That was just for you, Missy. Okay, just for you. All right. So they were in fear of this king. And now what is he going to do? He's going to, in speaking, he's going to demonstrate to them that's not anyone to fear. These things are out in the wilderness are nothing to fear. And he speaks to them in that way. In Isaiah chapter 8, I think, 8 or 18. 8. Anyway, I'm going to paraphrase. He says, to all those people who get into all these conspiracy theories and all those things that you think are conspiracies, he said, let me tell you something. If you're going to fear anybody, you should fear me. If you're going to be in dread of anything, you need to be in dread of me. Not that we should dread him in the sense of how we use the word, but that we should have this godly reverence and fear for him, that he is the creator of all things. He spoke it into existence. So I feel like that part of the reason he did that was to demonstrate, to put that fear in them, to demonstrate, I'm the only one you should fear. Now, the problem was, again, and we mentioned this earlier, their response was, please don't talk to us. Don't say anything to us. Quit talking, because if you continue to talk, we're going to die. Now, later on, it's in Deuteronomy 5, Moses, in recounting this back to that other generation that's about to enter into the land, he's talking about this, and he says, and I reported your words to God, and he said, they're right. Which would suggest, had he continued to speak to them, they would have died. But in what way? Now, that's where I see that what he was really trying to do was to compel them to die to themselves. And then the next Torah portion will kind of build on that notion a little bit as it relates to the laws of the bondservant. But he said, I agree with them. He's almost saying, yeah, if I'd continued to talk, they would have died. And then he says this, but oh, that they had a heart within them to keep my covenant, that all would be well with them and with their children forever. And so he is going to tell Moses what they've requested, yet he knows it's not in their heart to receive it. So in other words, he's revealing that the reason that they wanted him to quit speaking is what we read in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 20. They could not endure what was being commanded. That was the real problem. They could not endure what the Father was requiring of them if you're going to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So that's what the power of that was. And there was another question that was up there on the board, Jonathan. It's disappeared. I guess you had a crash or something. If you can get it back up, bring that Paul question back up to me. Who's next here? Yes, Dawn.
I wanted to comment on what you were talking about being stretched while we're waiting.
Yes.
And a lot of us this past week went through some stretching. And I think it was after Oneg last week that I was reflecting on some of the hard times that a lot of different people within the congregation have gone through, these little micro traumas, I guess you'd say. And then with you talking about stretching, Nate used to teach martial arts, and it was extremely important to stretch before you did any sort of working out. And that if you're going to be a bodybuilder, stretching is vital. You have to stretch those muscles, which is causing micro trauma to the muscle, which allows it to be more flexible, allowing it to be built up and allowing it to be stronger. So stretching is really important. But taking it to a spiritual level as we are suffering micro traumas through our week. We're being stretched for the purpose of building one another up when we come back together. So we're bodybuilders. We're building up a body. We are the body. And I just thought it was really cool that all of these things that we are being tested and tried and suffering, it's for the purpose of strengthening us. So when we think, God, why are you forsaking me? He's not. He's building us up so that we can strengthen one another, so that we can sojourn. The purpose is not evil. It's to build us. And then, so those tiny tears, one of the things that I always tell the kids is the reason for stretching is to cause us to be flexible. So my little saying in our home is, "Blessed are the flexible, for they shall never be bent out of shape."
I like that. That needs to go on
a T-shirt?
Yeah.
So if we are being stretched, then we're being forced to be flexible so that when the time comes and poo hits the fan, so to speak, we don't buckle or tear. We are able to kind of give and go with like that little tree that you were talking about. Instead of the sturdy, firm, stiff-necked oak, we've got to be flexible.
I'm just going to interject this real quick. That was the term I was trying to find in my brain when I was talking about that. Pliable, flexible, but they were obviously affected by the wind, but they weren't uprooted by the storm. Yeah. Which anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. He calls us to be like children, and if you think about the old oak tree versus the tender sapling, that's like children. They're more easily able to bounce back from traumatic experiences.
And don't we have to be like those little children to actually enter into the kingdom?
Yes.
Right?
Which my brain was tying all these together. I was like, that's so cool. That's so cool. Oh, I got to write that down. So I thought that was really cool. Also, when you were saying that Yah can use anybody, anyone or anything to communicate to us or to those that we're sojourning with. He even used a donkey. And sometimes I might be that jack donkey that he's using to talk into your lives.
I like the way you did that, Donna. Very good.
Sometimes it might be you. So
That's true. That's true.
So I just
a lot of times, depending on who you talk to, it is.
I love you, Beth. I'm teasing. But yeah, I just thought that was really cool how he can use some of those negative things that we would be told are negative, but they're actually positive.
What came to my mind as you were sharing that, and I'm having a hard time getting my brain to focus on some things today. But there's a passage in Scripture, and I can't remember where it's at. Maybe somebody else does. But it basically says this: if you can't handle running with the horses, what are you going to do when the chariots show up? In other words, being stretched, tying it to that. If we can't endure what he's dealing with us about now, what are we going to do later when, I think, what was your terminology? When the poo hits the fan, right? So anyway, that's kind of what went through my head. Who was next? Yes.
I just had a comment on that. I would say that over a year ago, I was coming out of a very long stretching period. And but the Lord really strengthened me. And after that stretching period, stretching would be actually an understatement of what I went through for a year. And even going back farther, but he strengthened me. And this last fall, we were down at Jekyll Island, and this kind of ties into it, like the next thing after what Beth said, because how much he strengthened me. But when we were down at Jekyll Island, we stayed in this residential area that the houses, it was amazing the size of the trees that were so close to the house. And when I bought a house in Calhoun, the first thing that we had to do, I hated it, but we had to take out an oak tree because it was huge, but it was right next to the house. But here on Jekyll Island, there were so many of these huge trees right next to their houses. And it was like the Lord was showing me that these were those little sapling trees that would bend during the windstorms, but they had grown up during the windstorms, the constant beating, and they were strong and they were big. And so as I went through, this time of stretching, and sometimes you come out of that and you feel, I'm so much stronger, and you think, oh, I'm never going to have to go through something like that again. And then you immediately know that the Lord says, no, I'm going to make you stronger. And I think that as we get nearer to these end times, these days that where we are going to be challenged more, I think that he wants to do that to us and grow us up from the sapling that bends and withstands the storm to a strong tree that's had to take it over and over again, but we are stronger in him, and we grow up very strong and big.
Amen. Something that occurs to me about that, he's not making us stronger just so we can be, the bodybuilders that go and oil themselves up and pose for pictures. Yeah, Arnold. That's not why he's making us stronger. He's making us stronger because there's something he wants us to do. There's things that we are here to do. So it's for a purpose. It's not the form, it's the function. But I like that analogy that you used. Now, who was next? Missy?
Okay, I have a few things now. Number one, we were discussing Moshe's wife not being with him, and then the thought was brought up, and I've had that thought before about maybe she wasn't, a complete believer in the way that Moshe would have needed at the time, and that could have something to do with why Moshe's two sons aren't really mentioned in any kind of lineage after that.
Yeah, kind of weird, huh?
So, maybe there was something there, and it's just best for us not to know for whatever reason. The second thing was someone online had asked about the power of the voice of God. And I don't know if it was a Midrash or if it was just legend, but there is the belief that when he spoke at the mountain, that it wasn't just something that they heard. It was something that they heard, something that they saw, something that they felt, and that it permeated more than just one of their senses. And that was just part of the power of it. It was just so consuming that they heard it, they saw it, they felt it. Now, how you hear or feel a voice, I don't know, but that's I've heard that before, and I don't know, like I said, I don't know if it's legend or Midrash, but I've heard it before that it was just so all-consuming and that it can't really be described. The experience couldn't be described because it was more than just heard. It permeated more senses than just the hearing.
Well, if you will allow me to read a verse here, if I can get there. Just to kind of speak to that. All right, Deuteronomy chapter 4. Verse 11, you came near and stood under the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire under the midst of heaven with darkness, clouds, and thick darkness. And the Lord spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the voice of the words, but you saw no similitude, only a voice. Okay, let me read it again. Make sure you understand what I'm saying. The Lord spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the voice of the words, but saw no similitude, only a voice. Now, a King James will insert the words, only you heard a voice. But my point is, those words aren't there in the text. Inferring what?
That they saw the voice.
They saw the voice, okay? That they heard the voice, they heard the words, but they saw the voice.
Right.
Now, this is tradition, okay? But it's at least hinted at here. The tradition is that when God spoke from the midst of that thick, dark cloud, because Jeremiah says your word is as fire. And that when his word went out, not only to speak to those people there, but he spoke in every language under heaven. Rabbinically, they believe it was spoken in 70 different languages because there were supposedly 70 nations, or nations, okay? But the tradition is, and I, again, underscore the word tradition, that when the Father spoke, that not only did they hear the words, but his voice issued forth in divided tongues of fire, speaking in every language under heaven. Now, why would I find that of interest? Acts chapter 2, right?
There's a connection there.
Because what appeared? These divided or cloven tongues of fire. And what did the people that were assembled there hear? The mighty works of God in every language under the heavens. So that in Acts chapter 2, as far as I'm concerned, this is just how Bill feels about it. It validates the tradition that's at the very least hinted at here in Deuteronomy 4, that when he spoke, like you just said, it wasn't just that they heard, but they saw. It was very real. All of their senses were just,
Like
awakened.
a sensory overload.
Yeah, that would be an understatement, I would think.
Which would also explain why they felt like they were going to die. Like it'd just be like too much.
Exactly.
Can't handle it.
Exactly. The only thing that I have personally that I could relate to that is many years ago, this was right as I met Brad. I may have told you the story, but Brad, I heard him speak on the principle of the seed. And by the way, if you've never heard him teach that or read his book, you have to do it. It will transform your perception and understanding of Scripture, I promise you. But I was working on something called the enmity between the seed. And when I heard him teach about the principle of the seed, and it was the missing piece of the puzzle for me and this other thing, I was sitting at the kitchen table, Beth was at the sink, I can still see it, I was trying to figure all this out, and it was like, shoo, just like that, I understood. I had written that book, the book that I wrote was in my head just like that. And I know you think I'm crazy for saying that, but I'm telling you, that's what happened. To the point that I started trembling, and I said, please make it stop, because I felt like I was just going to fall to pieces. I understood something, and it was like from start to finish, but it was in a second. And I've never had that happen before or since. Right. But that's the closest experience I have to it, and it was overwhelming. I can't imagine all the other.
Yeah.
So I see. And remember in Deuteronomy 5, he said, and the people are right. If I continued to do this, they probably would have exploded. Yeah. He didn't put it that way, but that's my
No, but it creates quite the imagery.
Yeah.
Okay, now the last thing that I was going to mention was, and it's kind of an incomplete thought here, so I'm hoping that you've heard something to this effect and can complete this thought here for me. When he first spoke to Moshe at the bush, there was a correlation, and something that I had heard somewhere this week, there was a correlation between the conversation at the bush, and there was like 5 points of the conversation at the bush that correlated to the 10 Commandments, and then the bush being on fire and the mountain being on fire. And something about when he promised Moshe at the bush that he was going to deliver the people and that he would bring them back around to the mountain, and then was that the same? Like was that the same? That wasn't the same mountain, right? The burning bush and the mountain.
Yeah.
Is it okay?
It is the same mountain, yes.
There was something in there that he was promising them, and he was like, "Well, how are they going to know?" And they're like, "Well, because you're going to come back here and do that." Well, that's not really something that I can tell right now, but that's kind of how Moshe solidified, and that's how he knew, was when he got back to that mountain and all of that happened again. But it connected a lot of similarities between the burning bush experience and the mountain experience where he handed down the Torah and the 10 Commandments. So I didn't know if you had some light to shed on that or not, because like I said, it was a half a thought that I had.
As far as connecting the two?
Yes, the two conversations.
I haven't really put a lot of thought into it as it relates to, blending the two together. He told him things in that initial visitation,
right,
that were going to happen. That even that Pharaoh's not going to want to let you go. It's going to require the death of the firstborn. But it also becomes obvious, at least I think, that Moses, even though he heard that, he still didn't put it all together. It took coming back to that mountain to kind of tie the bow on the package, so to speak,
right.
So that Moses
so his vision
realized,
would be more complete there.
Right. And we read it earlier in Hebrews, because even Moses at that point in time when this is happening, and the Father's coming down on the top in this thick dark cloud, and the mountain's a furnace and it's burning, it said Moses said, I'm freaking out. I'm afraid, I'm scared. So a lot of those things had to happen for Moses too, to kind of, solidify what he had called him to do. Beyond that, I really haven't compared the two. Now, this is kind of a sidebar to that. Some friends of mine, Jim and Penny Caldwell, maybe you've heard the name. They're the people that lived in Saudi Arabia back in the 80s that took all the pictures of the mountain that everybody has come to, or many people have come to believe is now probably the authentic Mount Sinai. Well, I didn't realize this, but in talking with them, and they got pictures and everything, that mountain actually has two peaks. And one, they believe, is referred to as Sinai, and one is referred to as Horeb. And so when they were investigating this many, many years ago, they said that they came across, I want to say it was an acacia tree. I may have that detail wrong, but they said they come across an acacia tree that was ancient. And apparently Jim, dabbles in botany and those kinds of things, and would know this. They said they came upon an acacia tree that had to be ancient. And they said, and we stood back and looked at it, and it took us a moment, but we realized that this acacia tree looked a lot like a menorah. And it was in between these two peaks. And so they theorize, that if this thing had been here thousands of years ago, and it looks like a menorah, was that the burning bush?
That is cool.
Yeah, I thought it was cool too. It has nothing to do with your question, but I thought it was cool. It jogged that memory. But I'm sure there probably are a lot more parallels between what happened in chapter 3 and what happens in Exodus 19 and 20. I've just never really looked into it too much. So, sorry. Aaron? Let me do this real quick. Is there a significance to Paul going into Arabia, and is it possible he went to the mountain? I think it's likely he went to the mountain. And yeah, I think there's great significance in him going to Arabia. This is where he got revelation. This is the guy that studied at the feet of Gamaliel for all those years, grew up knowing the Torah, the Tanakh, and all these things. But this is the conversation we were having, right? I know it wasn't you. But he went into Arabia, and that's where he got revelation. That's where he got the revelation of these things. He had the head knowledge, but he had to learn by the Spirit, that the Spirit had to reveal these things to him about what he had learned. And it's Paul who talks about, well, I want to read it. Pardon me just a moment here. Okay, in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, he says, I, brethren, when I came to you, came not with excellency of speech or of wisdom, declaring unto you the testimony of God. So I want you to take that statement and put it in the context of one who has studied at the feet of one of the most esteemed sages in all of Israeli history, Gamaliel. He studied at the feet of Gamaliel. But I didn't come to you in the excellency of speech or of wisdom, declaring unto you the testimony of God, because I determined not to know anything among you except Yeshua the Messiah and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling, and my speech and my preaching was not with enticing words of man's wisdom. Again, put that statement in the context of who he learned from. But in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, that your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. Now, where did Israel, we know that the plagues were poured out on Egypt, and they saw those things that happened in Egypt, but where did Israel really get a good dose of the demonstration of the power of God? Okay? But where did they hear God speak with an audible voice? Where did they see the throne room of God come down and meet the earth? At Sinai. All those other things were, magnificent works. But it's all culminating where? At Mount Sinai. He says, this is why I did that your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. Howbeit we speak wisdom among them that are that are mature, yet not the wisdom of this world, nor of the princes of this world that come to nothing. But we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, even the hidden wisdom, which God ordained before the world unto our glory, which none of the princes of this world knew, for had they known, they would have not crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, eye has not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of men the things which God has prepared for them that love him. But God has revealed them to us, how? By his Spirit. For the Spirit searches all things, yes, the deep things of God. He goes on from there. My point is, Paul is saying, in a nutshell, I learned a lot of stuff by men, and I learned a lot of their wisdom, and he's not disparaging that. He's just saying, but that's not how I'm coming to you. The Spirit of God is the one who teaches us all these things. He's the one that opens these things up to us. And knowing that he went to Arabia, and he was there for a while, I think it's very likely that he went to the mountain, because that's connecting with something. You know, that what happened there in Exodus 19 and 20, I believe, left a spiritual imprint on this earth. It's like the Temple Mount where Abraham takes Isaac. I believe that left a spiritual imprint on this earth where the temple stood. You know, the creator of the universe kisses the earth there. I believe it left a spiritual imprint. So Paul going into Arabia, how does he go into Arabia and not go there? I mean, that would be my thing. If I'm going to go to Arabia, I'm going to the mountain. But that's where he got revelation by the Spirit of all these things. And, I mean, what do we connect Shavuot to as believers in the Messiah? We connect it to Acts chapter 2. What happens in Acts chapter 2? They're empowered by the Spirit of God. And it's the Spirit of God who searches, yes, the deep things of God. So anyway, I think that that's the importance of it. I think it's very probable that he went to the mountain. And by the way, and this is just a sidebar, if you look at a map, it's interesting that the mountain that people are now contending is the authentic Mount Sinai sits almost directly south of Jerusalem, which I find to be very interesting. It's in direct line with it. Make of that what you will. And anyway, Aaron?
Yeah, well, people were talking about the the stretching. What I connected it to as well with what you were teaching about with stretching was the parable of the wineskin, and be like a new wineskin, because the new wine, new teaching, you know, here's Jesus saying the reason why these people who are not, you know, instructed Torah teachers are coming and being filled with my wisdom is that they don't think that they have it all figured out yet. They're looking for new instruction. And so be like a new wineskin that can stretch to fit the new wine. And so it's been kind of my prayer, and actually my family's prayer for a while, just to be like a new wineskin so that we can receive new instruction as God gives it to us, so that we don't think we know everything, and that we're not, you know, trying to keep the new wine out, you know, because as soon as we think we've got everything figured out, then, you know, we will say, well, we like the old wine better, you know, and not be able to stretch because we're an old wineskin that can't fit that new instruction. So
thank you. That's a very good point to make. All right, now, I'm going to go to Walt first, and then we'll come to you, okay? And I probably need to take a couple from online, too. What I want? Oh, Nick. Okay, I'm sorry. And then we'll come to you, Walt.
There's been a couple of questions. It's come up a couple of times on why Zipporah had stayed behind. And it's come up in the past militarily why Yahweh chooses to do the things he does and why he describes things in a military fashion. I am military. I started out in the Navy, and then I went into the Air Force. In the Navy, I had a top secret clearance. I worked for the government directly under George Bush when he was vice president. In the Air Force, I was a cop, but the Air Force's cop are infantrymen. So everything that I hear Yahweh's description on what he wants, I see it in a military fashion. The way he calls us to assemble with the sound of a trumpet. The sound of a trumpet is its own language. There are certain blasts to assemble. There's a certain blast to wake up. There's a certain a sound to eat, to sleep, to muster. Everything that you can think of, there's a certain tone and a certain sound, and you have to be listening. Otherwise, you're going to get left in the dust and get yourself killed. There's also some of the games that they played with us in our minds when I was going to get my top secret clearance was, how many of you are married? If you're married, you're going to have a hard time in your job because your wife will want to know, how was your day? And men, how many of us can say that
You're on your own, Nick.
fine dear is not going to work? And my particular job was handling the nation's secrets. And that was my job. And, yeah.
Yeah, we
now
all want to know how your
now
day went.
everybody wants to know. So it is, like you said, unencumbered to leave her behind. Also, if you're before an enemy, the first thing an enemy wants to do is learn your weaknesses. You have a wife and children. Let's target them. And so he could have been keeping them safe. I see it that way. I also see it as there's going to be questions. She's not a believer, as far as we can tell. There's nothing going forward, anything about the sons, so we don't know how they were raised or what was the case. But I see it militarily wise, that Yahweh always uses a lot of wisdom that he imparted to those of us who were in the military, that we see that there's a protocol, there's an order, there's a council, there's divisions, there is rank. So everything falls into place the way Yahweh establishes his kingdom, the way he wanted them to leave. They didn't just all get up and leave. They assembled and they marched in a very orderly fashion by their ranks, by their clans, by the tribe. So everything was in order and in fashion, and it wasn't just a cluster. It was very precise. And so some of the questions that come up, if you were in the military and you studied infantry, or if you studied some of the ways that there has to be an order, I see everything that Yahweh gave us was very military in origin. And so anyway, I just wanted to impart some of that. The other thing, I've only heard the voice of God audibly once. And I was, of all places, in my bathroom, away from the family, just getting by myself, had my Bible, and I'm reading Moshe, where children of Israel had sinned a great sin, and Yahweh wanted to kill them, and Moshe pleaded on behalf of the children of Israel. And a voice came through in my bathroom that said, for those of you who don't know, I was given away for adoption. I am 100% Native American. I was given away for adoption, and I was raised by an American family where I was raised in church, where I went into the military, where I started preaching. A voice came through that said, I birthed you to a race of people only to have you taken out and brought up by another. And I jumped up to see who was in my bathroom speaking to me. It was that audible. I let you go through what you went through so you could go back to your people and lead them to me. And that is exactly what I did. I went back up to the reservation and met my birth family, and I led them to the Lord. We planted a church on the reservation, and that was the first and only time that I ever audibly heard, and it scared me to death. And I came out of the bathroom and found Louise, and she says, "What is wrong with you?" Because I was trembling, I was crying. I had no idea what to make of this. To me, it just sounded dumb. I didn't understand it. And then it happened. And it was a beautiful, beautiful thing that Yahweh did in my life.
Thanks for sharing. Right behind you, Walt.
You know, talk about stretching and being squeezed. I had a lot in the last 7 years. But there was a book that I started to write with my wife, and we called it the Book of Remembrance. And the way you get through your trials is remembering the miracles that Yahweh performed in your life. There was a time that everything I turned around, it went black. The day I got married, they found my wife's mother dead. The last Passover we did together, 4 hours after that time, my wife went to sleep. My daughter turned 18, 17 years old. I'm going to my first feast, and she's diagnosed with possibly cancer and probably not having any children. I went to the feast. I fasted either 2 or 3 days. I'm not talking about myself. What I'm talking about is how you overcome these trials. Is you dig deep into your history of what you've done. Not, I'm sorry, in the wrong way, it was what Yahweh has done for me in this walk. They said she wouldn't have any children. She has 3. I think my oldest is 49 now. And part of the Book of Remembrance is really quite amazing because I had about 30 or 35 written down of these miracles. And when my wife was dying, I tore them out of the book, threw them on the floor with the book. I did not rip them up, just threw it on the floor. Then I picked them up and I started to rewrite them. And now 35 went to 45, maybe 50 even, I don't remember. And it was just to be part of the remembrance. Is that when we moved into a part of Florida, we were kneeling down and praying right before Sabbath. I'm just going to tell you a few of these. Is that we heard a shofar blowing. We both looked at each other, and she said, "What did you hear?" I said, "No, tell me what you heard." She insisted I told her. And we heard a shofar blowing. That's a miracle. We were doing Sabbath at home. And when we were doing Sabbath, we had a glass window open. We had a pool there. And a rainbow came into our living room. But it didn't happen once. It happened on the Sabbath one other time. We were driving to Sabbath, and it came into our car. And I remember her laughing, both of us laughing, "This is crazy." And as we kept driving, we thought we would never get out of this rainbow. I don't know how far we drove, in minutes or in miles. Another time when it was a Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 o'clock, and I had my Bible on my lap. I was reading, I was dozing off, and I was awakened to a hand on my head. And I felt every finger, and tears came down my face. One other time, this will be the last one, is the 7s in my life. You know, when Abraham sent his messenger out to find a wife for his son, he was praying, and she appeared at the right time, the precious time when he was praying, and that was the wife for Isaac. Well, this was entirely different. I went to Sabbath the first time after my wife died, and I had to go by myself. So the closest assembly I could go to was the Seventh-day Adventists. And I got there, and I stayed for about an hour and change. I picked myself up and walked. When I walked along the way, I got in the car, and I was driving home. It was only about 10, maybe 12, 13 miles away. And I decided for some reason to press the number to see what my mileage was. And many of you heard the story. It was 177,777. I'm not sure if there was a 1 there. I always thought there was a 1. But when I pulled into Berkshire Loop, it started 7s, 177,777. And I call upon these when I go through tough times. Because God is the God of miracles. He gives you these things. I'm telling you these stories to start your own book of remembrance. Remember your first child that was born. Remember the time you were in a bad accident, you walked away from it. You know, there's millions of miracles down here. Because this walk is not a piece of cake. It's far from it. You know, I'm coming into a finishing of a 7th year. It's quite amazing. It started on January 27th. It'll end on March 27th. And in this between stuff, a lot of things has happened. Last night, I always talk with Jean. I call her around 6 o'clock, and last night I didn't call her until about 6:45, I believe it was. And I explained to her, I said, I don't know where I went for the last hour. I was sitting there praying, and I was praying for Brad. I got so caught up in my prayers that I lost time of how long I was praying for. It may have been an hour, it may have been longer. I believe with all my heart that Brad's going to be healed. The prayer went similar to this: Father, I know Brad is a righteous man, but then you tell us that none of us are righteous, no, not one. I continued praying in the same mindset of him being healed. I went through a lot of things in my mind. Why would a man such as Brad, or mostly with Brad, he's a teacher, been doing it for many, many years. He's a good teacher. What is it? Is there something down his future that he shouldn't see, or maybe his family? I don't know. And it kept coming up that I have to proclaim this in the assembly. I wanted to talk to you early in the day about it, but this is a good opportunity too. Why would a man like him, why would Joe Good lose his daughter in the prime of her life? Your friend Dean lost his daughter too. I believe that was his name. Why does these things happen? Maybe something down in the future for the 2 young ladies that happened to die might have been very brutal. So maybe it's better. I don't know. But look down on your own lives, how he worked out miracles with you. Again, God is a God of awesome miracles. And he brings them, but we forget them. And if we forget them, we're going to be and we don't thank him for these things, all his blessings, we're going to be like those fellows who had leprosy. And when they got the leprosy, only one returned to thank Messiah. There's a prayer that, I give you thanks, living and eternal King, for you have mercifully restored my soul within me. Your faithfulness is great. It's a prayer I use every morning. I should do it for the children that are here. Every day I will thank you. Every day. I give you thanks, living and eternal King, for you have mercifully restored my soul within me. There's one, and there's 2 others which I can't come to right now, bring it up in my mind. But we have an awesome God, and we take his miracles for granted. For the sake of yourselves and your family, write them down, because there's so many of them. And you go through a trial, sometimes I forget I even have that book. I have them stored up here. But that's the time you have to need them. Just for future, just to think about. You know, the most precious thing in our assembly is these children here. And Jonathan Kahn did a teaching on it, not on this, but on similar to what I was reading last night. And these are the most precious things in our lives. You see, we were in the wilderness for 40 years. I spent 40 years in the wilderness. I'm doing another 40 now. And these 40 years are coming up quick. I pray that I'll be in his kingdom. I'll be here when he returns. I probably won't be, but I pray that way. But those children that are standing up there, they're so precious. That's where our prayers have to be set on, because they're the ones that will be walking into the land. That's it.
Well, thank you, Walt. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you. I'm going to take a few more here online real quick. And then I told you we would come to you over here. No? Okay. All right, well then, I'm going to take a few online, and then, brother, we'll close with you. But just hang on just a moment here. All right, so we understand archetypes in Scripture. What group of people does Jethro represent? I mean, we addressed the fact that he is someone who didn't see things firsthand, but he saw the results of what God had done, and he believed, and he abandoned old ways, and he embraced the God of Israel. So in at least on one level, he represents those who are the quote-unquote outsiders, but who come to believe and who join themselves to the people of Israel. There's probably other things that we could go into there, but let me get a few more of these. It says, are we in the third day of Hosea chapter 6, verse 2? After 2 days he will revive us. On the third day he will raise us up that we may live in his sight. By the word day being a year principle, did the 3-day cleanup warning to get ready for the third day warning start with the Revelation 12 sign? I don't understand the connection in the last part of the question, but I will say this, that there's a third day principle that runs from beginning to end. And just very quickly, in the beginning, Genesis chapter 1, on the third day when he had the seas gathered together into one place, and it said that he called forth the grass, the herb-yielding seed, the trees that bear fruit, whose seed is in itself after its own kind. He called those things forth. He didn't create that. He called those things forth, implying that the seed for those things were already in the ground, waiting for that call to come forth on the third day, which then goes and connects to what Yeshua did. He's the grain of wheat that goes into the ground to die, and when was he called forth? On the third day. So we take that forward, and we go into Hosea, the prophecy about where they say, come and let us return in the Lord. He is broken, but he will heal us. He is stricken, but he will bind us up. When? After 2 days he will do this. Well, you know, a day with the Lord is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day. So after 2 days he will revive us, and on the third day he will raise us up. All of that is to say that, yes, I do believe, prophetically speaking, that we are in that third day. I think that this congregation and what it represents, and our brothers all over the world that are returning to him and to his ways, is a fulfillment of that. Not necessarily the ultimate fulfillment of that, but is a fulfillment of that. So, and not to do in a commercial, but on our website, in the free section of our website, we have an extensive teaching called On the Third Day. So if you want more information. Did Jethro worship Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh prior to Moses coming to him, since the word mentions that he was a priest? We mentioned this earlier, actually, in that it's very possible he could have, but apparently it would have been one of others that he was also involved with. But after he comes to Moses in Exodus 18, it would seem that he abandoned all of that and come to the realization that the God of Israel was the one and only God. And then Beth sent me the verse that I was mentioning when we were talking with Dawn and the things that she was bringing up. I had another verse mixed up with this verse, but it's in Jeremiah chapter 12, verse 5. It says, if you have run with the footmen and they have wearied you, then how can you contend with horses? So the idea is, if you can't handle what you're dealing with today, how in the world are we going to handle with what's coming down the pipe later on? So what's the implication? Learn how to deal with things that are going on today, overcome those obstacles today, because there's other things that we're going to be called upon to contend with tomorrow. All right, and let's see. All right, here's a question that says expound on Exodus 18, 16 through 20, where Moses was judging matters according to the law days before it was given on Mount Sinai. What laws? I don't know that this, I'd have to go back and read that. and we're kind of running out of time here. I will just say this, and we'll maybe have to come back to this later. But things were written down at Sinai. But that doesn't mean that God hadn't already given his people his laws and instructions. We talked about this Wednesday night, about how Moses already knew the difference between clean and unclean animals. Who taught him? Well, that must have been information that had been handed down from Adam. How did Abel know to offer a more excellent sacrifice? God testifying of his gifts, because that was something that they already knew. It just seems that these things were written down at Mount Sinai. It's also, I think, logical to think that being in Egypt, having to some degree assimilated into Egyptian culture, these are things that needed to be revisited. These are things that need to be written down. These are things that needed to be conformed to and abandon the ways of Egypt. So that's about the best I can do with that one right now, because I'm going to go to this brother. And the reason we stop around 5 o'clock, you need to understand, everybody out there, is that we have people working with young people and children and things like that, and we have to be respectful of them as well. So I know that many of you could stay on here all day if I would continue to talk all day. But we have to be respectful of others and their time. Okay, so just wanted to let you guys know that, because there's lots of questions coming in online.
Please confirm, Brad Scott is still with us. They're concerned online.
Brad is still with us. Yes. I talked to him the other day. Yes, Brad is still with us. I talked to him the other day. He has a good attitude. He was laughing and cutting up with me, as I would expect that Brad Scott would do, and cracking jokes about all of this, quite frankly. At the same time, very, very aware that this is a serious matter, and that he and Carol are, last I talked with them anyway, we're investigating all their different options and deciding what kind of treatments that they're going to go with. Which, by the way, he didn't tell me to say this, but I'm going to take it upon myself to say it. Now's not the time to bombard them with emails about you need to do this and you need to do that and you need to try this and you need to go there and you need to go here. I think there's a lot of that going on, and they're just trying to kind of assimilate all this information and make decisions. But Brad is fine in terms of attitude, and he's still working on things. He's still working on teachings, all of those kinds of things. So yes, he is still very much with us. Yes, sir.
My name's Stephen, by the way.
Thank you, Stephen. It takes me a few times.
That's okay. A couple things I wanted to mention about Jethro himself. When we look at specifically, I wanted to ask you about chapter 18, verse 11, where he says, "Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all mighty ones, for in a thing wherein they dealt proudly, he was above them." And I checked this is from the King James, and I checked the ESV on that, and it reads pretty similarly. So I'm just wondering about the second part of that verse.
Okay, what verse was that again? I'm sorry.
18:11. For in the thing wherein they dealt proudly, he was above them. And I'm wondering what is for the thing, because it seems like he's talking about the mighty ones, the idols. He realizes that Yahweh is greater, but then he's making a comparison here. Yahweh is greater than the mighty ones, but the mighty ones, the idols, they had done something. And he's commenting on that.
Well, here is what another translation says. Okay, let me read it, and this may answer your question. It says, "Now I know that the Lord, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, is greater than all ha-Elohim." That's what it says in Hebrew, all of the gods. And then it says, "Yes, for that they," which is kind of interesting, "dealt proudly against them." So reading it from this one, it almost suggests that they were, how do I want to put this? we know that these gods weren't gods. All right? We know that there's idols and things that are worthless and things that can't speak and hear and all these kinds of things. So we know that it's not the gods because those gods don't have any kind of, they don't exist except in what, the people that, chose to believe in these things and to purport these things. So going back to what he said in Egypt, when he brought the plagues upon Egypt, he was going to bring judgment against all the gods of Egypt. All right, so was he bringing judgment on the gods that don't really exist? Or was he showing the people that put their confidence in them, who boasted of them, who defied him, was it that he was showing them, those people, that these things that you put your confidence in don't exist? They're worthless. I have power over that. So that's how I would read it. That's how I would, that's the message that I get from it, is that they, or, these things that don't really exist are dealing proudly against him, but he judged those gods to show people that these things are worthless and have no power. So anyway, that's how I would see it. That's the way I would read it.
And the other thing then is verses 13 and 14 have always been very of great interest to me. I did a website on spiritual abuse years ago, and it seemed to me that Moses was taking or exceeding his authority. And when it mentions that Moses sat to judge the people, this is in verse 13, and the people stood by Moses from the morning unto the evening. And I thought, here they're standing, they're suffering, and he's sitting, and obviously he's got a very long day if he's doing this all day. So it seemed to me that it's more than just a matter of numbers, but that Moses had perhaps started to think of himself as being like Pharaoh. And so the thing that he had resisted earlier was the thing that he was becoming. And I get the impression from what, if you look at the wording very carefully there in what Jethro says in verse 17 and 18, for this thing is too heavy for thee, thou art not able to perform it. So it's more than he can take on, but also that especially in verse 19, and here's what it says here: hearken now unto my voice, I will give thee counsel, and Elohim shall be with thee. Be thou for the people toward Elohim. It seems to me that he's seeing that the people maybe are suffering some type of abuse, and that he is intervening, or interceding, I should say, on their behalf.
Well,
and so I'm wondering if there's something in the Hebrew that tends to say that. It looks to me like he doesn't want to directly confront Moses on this, but he's saying you're being too heavy-handed on the people.
No, there's nothing in Hebrew that would support that. I mean, actually what I'm looking at in Hebrew, it's the people are standing before him because they're coming to Moses, and asking him to do these things. And now, I mean, I guess it's always okay to question and to wonder about these things. But I don't see that anything in the text that suggests that at all. It seems to be saying that, Moses, you're going to burn out. You can't handle this. One person's not going to be able to handle this. And he's saying, well, the people are coming to me, and they're standing before him, it says here. They're coming before Moses. And I go back to something that was said while they were still in Egypt, when he saw two of his brethren contending with one another, and he goes to break up the fight. And they said, well, who made you prince over us? All right, so there was it's more of there's an attitude that's been consistently showing up in the people toward Moses and that who do you think you are, and that you've been placed over us this way. It seems they're always having a problem with him. Korah, Dathan, Aviram, the 250 notable men, they're leading a rebellion. Okay, but Moses makes the point, you're not rebelling against me. You're rebelling against God. So I'm not going to say that Moses, just like anybody else who has that kind of influence. I mean, I'm not going to say that somebody couldn't succumb to the temptation to look at themselves in that way. But we also need to include this in the conversation. Moses didn't want this job. Moses tried his best to get out of getting this job, which I am of the opinion is exactly why God chose him for the job, because he didn't want it. So it seems to me that the Father has always looked for and placed in position those who have the heart of a shepherd. You know, it's the people who want the job. It's the Korahs, it's the Dathans, it's the Avirams, it's the Absaloms. It's those people who actually want the authority, who want to be the ruler. Those are the ones you have to really watch out for. So I'm going to respectfully and humbly disagree with the idea that Moses is being heavy-handed here in that he's being rebuked by his father-in-law. I think his father-in-law is coming to him and saying, you've got more than you can handle right here, and you're going to have to get some people who can help you and assist you in this, or you're going to burn out. So that's how I would say it. Look, again, I know that we could probably talk all day long, but it's 5:15, and I am going to be respectful of Nayla and those that are working with the young people. And we're going to come to a conclusion today. And I hope that it has been a good day for everyone, beneficial. I hope everyone's had a good Shabbat. And I hope that everyone will have a restful evening. I am going to ask Nick, brother, come here, please. I'm going to ask you, grab that microphone. Since it's your honey's birthday, I'm going to ask you to conclude in prayer for us today. Okay?
Happy birthday to you. Okay, that's enough of that.
Don't be cruel, Nick.
Father Yahweh, we thank you and we praise you, Father, for a wonderful day. A day of fellowship, a day of rest, a day to hear from your Spirit, your Ruach. We thank you, Father, that you've called such servants as us, Father, that we heeded your call to hear your voice. And, Father, that we came together rejoicing, Father, that you are still our King, and, Father, that we are your people. So, Father, we ask that you would go before us, Father, and make our path straight, Father, that we hear from you, Father, that you would heal our hearts, heal our bodies, cleanse our minds, Father, that we may see and hear you. So, Father, as we leave this place, we just ask, Father, that you pour out your blessings upon all your people, Yisrael. We give you thanks and praise in the name of your Son, Yeshua HaMashiach, we pray. Amen.
Don't be cruel, Nick.
Father Yahweh, we thank you and we praise you, Father, for a wonderful day. A day of fellowship, a day of rest, a day to hear